So it's been so much achieved, particularly over the past 5 years, but also in a longer time frame of the project. And sort of hearing about it all condensed like that together, it really highlights just how far the project's come and how it's developed over that time. So now we have a chance for you to ask our speakers any questions that you might have. I've seen quite a few flying in here, so we'll try and get through as many as possible before lunch. So let's have a look what we've got. So the first question is for Emma. There's been quite a few about Aberdeen. So grey squirrel control is often controversial among the public. What is the general attitude towards grey control within Aberdeen City?
I'd say it's definitely more positive than negative. In Aberdeen City, you know, people, particularly people that have been living there for some time, and maybe the slightly older generations, and I say older, I'm my age and older, who remember having red squirrels in their gardens and in the city parks. And there's a really good connection with people who can remember red squirrels being there, who are quite keen to bring them back again, shall we say. And then, I mean, obviously support extends beyond that as well, but in my experience, there's definitely a lot more positivity than negativity in Aberdeen, thankfully.
I've got a question that perhaps Mel, you might be able to comment on, but it might also get answered later on in session 3. But how far has Squirrelpox spread northwards, and has it followed the modelling predictions?
Well, we did have a meeting last night where we talked in detail about the spread of Squirrelpox, and I believe the idea is to load that recorded talk up onto the CrowdComms website, so anybody will be able to look at it if they want to. But the furthest north it has got, well, the interesting thing is that it took 8 years to get from the Scottish border with Cumbria up to the central lowlands. But in the last 8 years, since it arrived in the central lowlands, it really hasn't got very much further. So the very first place we found Squirrelpox was at a place called Plean, which is near Bannockburn, south of Stirling. And really, that's probably the same place that it's about almost the furthest north. We have had odd positive results that have come from slightly further north, but they seem a bit questionable. One from Strathallan, where we did an awful lot of testing and we only came up with one very slightly positive result. So there's a possibility that this may be some sort of cross-reactivity with another virus that's out there. And another one, I think I've now had 2, I think Mac will be able to confirm this, on the southwest corner of Loch Lomond. The first year we had one that came back positive. We only could catch 2 squirrels in that place the whole year, you know, despite intensive efforts, particularly after we got this positive result. So how that was maintained with just a population of 2 squirrels is a bit of a mystery. And again, it might be some sort of cross-reactivity with something else. But I would say consistently, although not over the last 2 years, it has to be said, consistently Plean and, say, Erskine on the south edge of Erskine Bridge, those are probably the 2 furthest north ones where we've had repeated positives coming back.
Okay, thanks, Mel. I've also had a question asking what's involved when you borrow a trap, and is this just for certain areas? I don't know if Kat wants to answer that about trap loans.
Yep. So in terms of it being in certain areas, yes, it does tend to be within the parks itself. So if you contact, for example, your local group or one of the conservation officers, they can certainly let you know about that. In terms of actually borrowing a trap, it would just be a case of getting in touch with us or the local group, and they would come round, set it up, show you what it involves, checking it. If you're not keen potentially on doing the deed yourself, we can also potentially link you up with an on-call dispatcher from the local volunteer group as well, who you can call if you catch a grey squirrel, and they'll come round and sort that out for you. So it's fairly easy. If you just get in touch with us or your local group, we can set that up for you.
Brilliant.
But can I just say that this varies slightly depending on the area. Not everywhere has local groups. So I don't know what area that question was coming from, but it does differ slightly along the Highland Line and in Aberdeen.
Yeah, so in Aberdeen, it's basically in people's own gardens, and we do dispatch for people with a 7-day-a-week call-out service.
And then it's a bit different in the Central Lowlands. So for the most part, we stick to that Highland line where we're doing priority control, but actually in the Argyll and Stirlingshire region, we do go a little bit below that too to try and stop that movement of greys up around the Stirlingshire area. And again, we have a bit of a patchier situation with dispatches. We really are reliant on local people giving us a hand. We don't have an on-call dispatch service that's 24/7 or anything like that. It's a little bit more like in the south of Scotland, and we don't have groups, so it is a little bit kind of more independent in that sort of thing. But get in touch and we'll see what we can do.
Okay, thank you. A question for Emma. Would pine marten scent deter reds from traps while not bothering the greys?
That's a very good question. So we have been hoping so, based on the study that came out last year by Josh Twining. And I'm going to talk about all this in my pine marten talk later if you're interested. But we really hope that pine marten odor would deter red squirrels from traps. And we have trialed it and it hasn't worked yet. So we're going to obviously adapt what we're doing. We haven't used exactly the same method. So in the study where it did appear to be successful, where you got 2 days where reds basically avoided feeders, there was pine marten scat was mixed with water and the feeders were absolutely doused with them. Didn't deter grey squirrels, very much deterred red squirrels for 2 days, and a window of 2 days would be like fantastic for us. We don't want to completely douse our traps in scat. Well, certainly that wasn't our first option. So we actually quite neatly put fresh pine marten scat at the corner, at each corner of the trap, and it didn't deter red squirrels at all. So we're waiting. It's been a quiet few months in terms of trapping just with autumn, so we're waiting until things get busier again, and we're going to try upping the ante with the scats and see if it makes any difference. But yeah, it hasn't shown any promise for us yet, unfortunately.
Thank you. A question for Sarah. Is there much engagement with schools in areas like the Lothians, places where greys are pretty common but might make people more aware of the need to control for greys?
So actually working with schools isn't really sort of my one of my main areas in my remit, but I am encouraging volunteer groups in the southeast to get involved with their local schools. So it's really down to the groups if they wanted to engage schools. So far, the main areas where they've been working with schools, primary schools and or secondary schools, are in the Tweed Valley and the Esk Valley. So I suppose Tweed Valley is kind of the nearest area to the area you were speaking of. But apart from that, it hasn't gone beyond that yet. But yeah, it just depends what the networks do in the future. I do think it's a really good idea, because then the children can go home and take that information to their parents, and of course the children will hopefully grow up with an interest in red squirrel conservation and carry on the amazing work, perhaps some of them. So yeah, thanks.
Kind of an interesting question for Marianne. Do you think it's possible to go for eradication of greys in Loch Lomond Park?
Oh, that's a tough one. It is almost red only zone, but it's not an isolated area, so we can't kind of suddenly block it off. So you'll always have kind of the greys coming towards it at least. But there has been a lot of progress done to actually get those kind of greys out of the national park. There's still a few little incursion areas, but we're heavily focusing on those. So I think there could be, but you'll always have that threat of greys kind of being nearby to come back in. So we'll have to kind of work a little bit beyond their boundary to do that. So, but maybe, yeah.
Can I just add a little word to that to say, we also have an issue on the islands within Loch Lomond itself, where grey squirrels seem to be able to swim to shore and back again, and reds probably too, but it's greys obviously that are the problem. So it's been, because these islands are publicly accessible, it's been really difficult to work out how to get rid of the grey squirrels on the islands, because they are perhaps the only grey squirrels left in that area, so they can swim onto shore and wreak their havoc on the shore, but we need to devise a way of getting rid of those if we were going to nail the situation, I feel.
Yeah. I'm not sure if anyone can comment on this, but we've been asked, is it possible that reds could eventually in the long term become immune to Squirrelpox virus? I'm not sure if anyone can.
I mean, this was a question that was broached at the meeting last night about squirrelpox. It turns out that maybe 8% of the squirrel carcasses that have been exposed to squirrelpox, 8% of them show no disease symptoms at all, or and certainly from the work that's gone on that you may hear about later on on the Lancashire coast. There seem to be some squirrels that are exposed to squirrelpox, develop the antibodies. Actually, Kat can probably tell you more about this because she's worked on that project. But they survive. So we know that some red squirrels do have some kind of immunity. And I guess you would think those that survive would be the ones that would pass their genes on to the next generation. So it is possible that it might be some drift, but it is so hard to tell. You would still need to prevent grey squirrels from moving in every time these local crashes happened in red squirrel populations, because there's such a low percentage of red squirrels that seem to have this resistance.
And kind of a second question that's been asked is, what is habitat management? What do we mean when we're referring to habitat management? I'm not sure who might want to explain what that is.
I think Jenny's volunteering.
I was going to say, do you want me to take that one?
Yes.
So yeah, I saw another related question, I guess, about habitat preferences. So we do know that red squirrels are obviously native and would make use of the sort of full range of native conifer and broadleaf species. But the grey squirrels do seem to have a certain preference for broadleaves, particularly the large seeded broadleaves. They will make use of other conifer species, but it tends to be at a kind of lower density. So I guess there's been this thinking that by avoiding planting large seeded broadleaves in particular, that you could deter grey squirrels from being able to colonise certain areas. But beyond that, I guess, just in terms of habitat management, then if you want healthy, robust red squirrel populations, then you need to have a sufficiently large area of suitable habitat for them. So just by having a range of suitable species of the right age, and ideally a mixture of species as well is obviously good for promoting a bit of resilience for the population, because there will be a continuous seed supply from a range of different species. So there's a certain amount, I guess, that that can be done at a more strategic level in terms of trying to ensure that the red squirrels continue to have suitable areas of habitat in the long term.
There's also the ability to adjust felling plans in larger parts of forest, so that you've got smaller felling coops. You maintain at least some fruiting trees at all times during you're in the forest, so that and connectivity, that's also important in all situations. Actually, it's important within the forestry that you don't just clear fell so that you've left a little population of squirrels isolated. They need to have connectivity to the rest of the forest. But also just generally, linking up forests and making it more easier for red squirrels to travel from one good habitat patch to another is another great thing that you can do. And plant a hazel tree. That's my favorite thing. They love hazel, red squirrels. So do greys, mind you. So you'd have to do grey squirrel control as well.
Okay. I've had a couple of questions coming in asking about the recent storm and what impacts that might have had on the squirrel populations or our work.
I know that there's been particular areas of the country that were quite badly hit. I think the northeast is one of them. Is that right, Emma?
Yeah, and, absolutely battered.
The Berwickshire coast as well, areas that have been flattened, conifer blocks that have been flattened. And the East Lothian coast. From that point of view, I guess in East Lothian, not such a huge problem for red squirrels, because there weren't ever really that many red squirrels there since about, I suppose, the year 2000 maybe. But maybe Emma can say something a little bit about what's happened in the northeast.
Yeah, well, so we haven't been able to actually access most of our sites because they're not accessible. They're unsafe to go into. But I've seen pictures of some of them absolutely flattened. So we'll have lost some of our equipment for sure. And over the next few weeks and into the new year, we'll hopefully get a better handle on that. In terms of how it's affected squirrels, it's hard to say. I mean, they're not absolutely tied to any particular dray, and none of them should have young in the dray right at the moment. And they tend to have multiple drays, and you would hope that at least some of their drays and cavities that they use are still usable. Obviously will have been really traumatic, and probably some squirrels won't have survived, but hopefully, they're resilient enough to actually withstand extreme weather events like this. And the fact that they're not actually tied to any one specific tree, they have multiple options. Hopefully some of their options will still be available.
Okay, well, it looks like we've run out of time, so I haven't been able to get through all the questions. Some of the pine marten questions we'll put to Emma in the session 3, so we'll keep hold of those, because there's a few that came in about pine martens. So thank you everyone for all your questions that you have sent in, and to all our speakers for this morning's session. We're now going to have a break for lunch, so we'll be back here at 1 p.m. and we'll be looking at red squirrel conservation around the UK. So thank you very much, and I'll see you back here at 1 o'clock.